Welcome to our class for Music Curriculum Methodology for Tuesday the 9th of August. I apologise in advance that I can't be at today's class due to other school commitments. However, I'll cover the same content today and I look forward to seeing you in week 4. We'll be covering 4 things in this, what first is a rubric grading of the analysis unit so that you understand how you get your grades. And so that's for assignment 1 for semester 2. Then we'll be looking at the placement survey that was handed out at the beginning of week 1, and that was the Google Docs. And then we'll be looking at the online resources that some of you have requested to become familiar with, followed by some integrated teaching strategies. And then we'll be looking at the Music First skill developments and where I expect to see you at when we have our class next week. So the Music First software is really important, that learning management system, because that will become the basis for your assessment for the final assignment for weeks 5, 6, 7 and 8 to conclude the year's work following your second teacher placement. Okay, let's get stuck into it. We're now going to go through what's required for the grading of our first assignment for semester 2. Now in our week 1 resources, we had the analysis unit task sheet, and it says prepare a teaching resource and lesson plan that focus upon developing a student's musical perception, analytical skills, as well as music literacy. Word count's about 1,000 words, and it's intended for a year 9 students with a mixed ability levels of grade 1 to grade 3 AMEB. And so the steps are listed quite clearly here, and then we come to the assessment criteria. What I'd like to go through today is how you create a rubric, and I've given you a rubric that was developed last year by the class and myself, and the criteria listed here for the assessment become the indicators for the rubric. So we've got within the assignment, I'm expecting annotated examples, assembled resources, or a list of them, as well as PDF versions, a lesson sequence and plan of some description, use of other musical learning embedded within the learning activity, so there's a sense of integration within the tasks, sequential strategy steps, meaning that it's very clear for the students how the learning is progressing. Clarity of the tasks, so we don't want to have confusion of things jumping around out of order, so there's the sense of sequence, the 2 things there. Clarity of assessment, meaning the students know why they're getting a certain grade and how many marks certain questions may be worth. Now, out of the 3 lessons, you would want to have a progression. Now I've given you a template or an exemplar. So the exemplar was back here under the resources here, the grading sample. And within that I've got my analysis assignment worksheet. Now that's not the first thing we should look at. We should look at this one here, the overview. It tells us what our learning focus is, tonality and modulation. The musical vehicle was the Bach Piano Prelude No. 1. Of course, go back to the week 1 movie if you'd like to see how we went through the process of teaching this material or modelled how one approach could be. Explanation of the class group, the lesson duration. I've listed a few URLs there for resources. Annotation of score assessment. The learning outcomes are listed. And then I've gone through the lesson sequence. Okay, and you can read just as well as I can. But note that we end up having a summative oral test and a summary of learning. In lesson 2, hand out an analysis worksheet. Now this worksheet is probably this one here. So the intention is the students complete this within class. How much of this takes place sequentially or as a test, well, that's up to you. A worksheet tends to suggest that it's not meant to be a test. It should be a progressive thing and a learning tool. So hence the notion of a worksheet. So when we come to the rubric, and I provided the rubric here on this within the resources, you'll notice we have the rubric listed here. And this was created by looking at the criteria from the task sheet. Now, the assessment criteria, annotation, examples, assembled resources, etc. I group these into 4 categories. Now, how we go about building a rubric, well, I hope that you've covered that within some other areas of your grad dip ed, but if you haven't, I've prepared a little template here, and there's a link to the rubric creation thing from Assessment for Learning, which is a very good website, so let's just go onto it and have a bit of a look. Success criteria and rubrics, well, there's a little introduction for what Assessment for Learning is about. It's to try to make what's meant to be taught and how they get their grades quite clear to the students. Therefore, when we create a rubric, it should have clarity of language and be simple enough for a student to understand why their piece of work is getting an A, B, C or a D. And in many respects, that's exactly what I'm doing for your assignment number 1. By giving you an exemplar, by giving you the rubric, you should know what grade you're likely to get by looking through the annotations here and the differentiation between the grade bands. So look through this bit here. How to design rubrics goes through it in a step-by-step process. I'm just going to give you a very brief summary of why this piece of work that I'm presenting is worth a certain grade, and that way you can measure against your own. I've uploaded this document here, which is an interpretation of the rubric and how we use an A, B, C, D, E grade to a 15-point grade scale. So with the rubric, very standard now that rather than using marks, we use grading. And this is on a 5-level grading, A to E. But when you put the pluses and minuses in, you end up with a scale which gives us a numeric value from E minus 1 to A plus. So if they didn't submit any work, there's a 0. From our discussion within the class last year, we came up with this grading, which was a B plus overall for this work. Now, to explain why it got a B plus, well, you'd need to go through and have a look at the various resources. But fundamentally, within the grading sample, when we look at the overview, the analysis lesson plan here, highly detailed and thorough consideration, well, it was regarded that it was more a B within the analysis, which therefore means that it had detail, was well considered learning objectives and outcomes listed, the lesson sequence and timing. So those were considered and clearly addressed, and a well-developed range. But it wasn't highly detailed and highly developed. So what would that look like? Well, that's an interesting challenge. You have to do something more than what's listed within my example, wherever that may be. Let's just go back to here. This is my example here. So I had 2 pages, not to say that I didn't do a lot of good work. Could I have done better and made it clearer? Yes. So it ended up with a B grade. When we come back to the, I need to find out what we've got here, the analysis worksheet for grading. And within our rubric, if I can find our Word document somewhere around the place, there it is. Our worksheet assessment also got a B, and our annotation of the score got a B plus, and the resources. So A minus for the resources. So when I go in through there and look at the range of things, it's clear that these resources tie quite well back to my overview of how I would use these, and I've explained it, and they all have a fair support. The annotated example here has some very clear structures. It started off with this here without any formatting within it, and I've directed the learner's attention to these areas here. So I've written in some notation. There's an expectation that they're going to complete some chord structures. I've put in some additional chords and some of the spelling. It's how you use this annotation to direct student learning that's important, not necessarily that you've done an analysis. You've got to be able to apply this to your classroom teaching so that the students then use this as a vehicle for their learning. You'll notice that I've put a subdivision underneath here, which would be an intention for the students to continue on. I would expect that the overview explains how they're going to do that, and therefore this annotated example was regarded as being annotated example a B+. So there's clearly things that people felt I could do better, which is good. The A- for the learning resources, yeah, it's pretty good. Is it up there to an A+ level? Well, apparently not. So there's more that can be done. So you'll be aware of that. The worksheet assessment, when I come in, look at my worksheet assignment here, you can see from the questions, I haven't got any grade value against each one of the questions. If we're going to be adding it up and putting a score against it, which if work is worthwhile doing, they want feedback, and in this case here, graded feedback is an important measure for learning, and we do need to record student progress and be accountable. So therefore, having some grade scores against some of this would make a lot of sense. It's fairly neatly formatted. We've got some bar numbers here referring to the musical example, so there's a bit of creativity. So I've been able to integrate a number of things within this assignment. We've got some multiple choice questions, so there's a range of questions evident. It's not just one style of questioning. It's clearly meant to be a printout so that students can highlight and write on the page. And here, a bit of manuscript so they can go away and do some work on a keyboard or guitar or whatever the example may be. And an oral test here, so you'd imagine I'd be playing some chords on a piano for them to try to work those things out and identify them. I'd expect to have some clear example within the overview of what I'm going to be doing there, and there's not a lot of detail there. So that's perhaps why it ended up with the grade that it got, which is a B. Within the rubric though, if we come across to our grading rubric, if I can find it, where are we, grading rubric, you'll see the different levels. Now I haven't put pluses and minuses, so if it's a little bit higher, a little bit lower, well, that's the way it is. Other assembled resource, imaginative and appropriate embedding of additional music learning, oral rhythm theory, historical, etc. Broad range of assembled resources that provide some detail. And then you go down to the various lower levels here. Limited embedding of additional musical learning, a limited range of assembled resources. So that's fairly clear from those resources that it's somewhere in here. Is it extensive? Well, maybe not. So that's why it maybe is around that, somewhere between A- and B+. For the worksheet assessment, it was given a B. So detailed knowledge and well-informed approach to directing students' learning. Professional level of learning, order and learning support. Yeah, numbered. It sort of evolved. Detailed consideration of grading allocation. Well, didn't really have that. So it was somewhere down here. So no consideration, limited consideration of grading allocation. So maybe down in the D and the E. So you'd highlight those little things. But just because there's one in the D and one up, and most of it's up in the B, well, it's probably more in the B grade, even though they may have one area that's down lower. It doesn't mean that it becomes a C automatically. It's where most of the weightings are. And you'll notice that there are several indicators within each one of these steps of the rubric. Detailed and well-considered learning objectives, outcomes, assessment, lesson sequence, lesson timing. Now, they might have some of these, but may not have others. So recognising that some elements may be apparent here and some here, it's where the bulk of the indicators are, where the grade should be highlighted. Now, this is being developed so that it's very specific for this assignment, and you'll be using this same rubric to grade your fellow students' work. So you might like to, once you think you've finished your assignment, go through this and see what grade you think you'd give your work, and then you get a chance to look at other people's work during your prac teaching period to decide, well, what sort of great ideas do they have in the way they lay things out, and what can I apply? Now that we've gone over the rubric, let's now look at the grading sheet that you're going to be using for your assessment of other people's work. You'll notice here that my exemplar has been given a B+, B, A-, and then you see a breakdown of scores. Now this is based upon the 15-point scale. So a B+ was 12 here, a B 11, so I've got 12 plus 11 plus 11 plus 13, so we end up with 47 all up. Divide that in half and round a little bit, so it's around 24, and then divide by 15, divide it again by half, so 12, and that ends up with a point score of a B+ for this whole assignment. So I've used the grade to convert to a numeric value, and then added it together, and then pulled it back down to a division of 15. So it's a simple enough process to come up with a grade that's fair. It's represented 4 different parts of the assessment, so that we aren't just looking at one particular thing. We can recognise and celebrate that some things were done quite well, like the learning resources and the score annotation, and others, they're somewhere in the middle. Which is good, but it's better than just a bare pass. It shows that there is some proficiency there, and it's not highly proficient yet, but it's getting close to it. You're going to be using a similar sort of thing here, so you would put a student's name and then putting a grade comment there, as well as a comment about what you thought was something that was memorable within each of these student's piece of work, things that you take away from it. But we'll go through that in a little bit more detail next week. Thank you. During week 1 of this semester, we looked at a survey regarding your teaching placement. And within it, we had this Google Doc. And when we clicked on that link, it opened up a survey and was based upon the an outline of the Practical Guide to Teaching Music in the Secondary School by Evans and Philpott. And we had 3 questions for you, plus this 4th one of what do you consider you still need to know before your next teaching placement. So I was going to talk through some of these questions that people have brought up that they'd like to cover. But when we have a look at this document, there's a lot of blank spaces here of people who haven't bothered filling things in, which is a bit of a shame. I think there's only about 6 people who have actually got around to it. However, that's your choice and your use of time. But if you have a read through these, you get a fair idea of the experiences that other people are having. So it's only as useful as you want to make these documents. One of the things that comes through is that people are looking for resources. So if I just go through a number of this, assessing rubrics, efficiently organising results, well, we're covering that this week. Being able to assess efficiently, strategies, conducting an ensemble, warm-ups, etc. That's something that Janelle should be covering. Traditional and classical terms for bands and choirs. Well, yep. Conducting ensembles, yep. Where am I going to find helpful resources? Okay, worksheets. Arranging for contemporary bands. A site where I can get ideas for games. More on conducting large ensembles. More useful technology resources. Now, all of these desires for additional information, which is exactly what the question was about. Many professional associations, Australian Society of Music Education being one of them, ABODA for band conducting, ANCHOR, Australian National Choral Association for choir conducting. All of these professional associations regularly run workshops which are really worthwhile tapping into, particularly if you want to get these skills. Now, you will know in your teaching placement that to be in front of 20, 30 students and not be prepared or not be confident is a really vulnerable thing. So having the opportunity to conduct a group, yeah, it's important that you get that experience, but you're not going to be great at it straight away. So practicing it in a classroom setting is a really good start before you get up into a lunchtime ensemble. Or better still, working with a small group of students and conducting them, rather than trying to throw yourself in the deep end with 30-odd choir singing students. Regardless of that, you need to start doing it if you want to get good at it. And working with community choirs is a really good start, or community bands. So anyway, resources is something that a lot of people have identified. So I'll just go and address some of those things. I've mentioned at the start the Scootle resources, and many of you have already subscribed, and I'm subscribed here. So if I type in music, it should bring up quite a few lists. And as you can see, well, the keyword music, there's a lot of entries, whether they're actually, you could say how focused they are. But if we come through here, you can see there are resources for unclung, music number patterns, probably lots of different things that may be of interest to you, the music of James Blake. Ross Edwards, let's have a look at this one here. Ross Edwards being an Australian composer. Often we will want to be looking at people, Australian art composers. And this one here suggests that he was struggling with composing for a while until he reconnected with nature. And you've got this movie here, and it says that ship was closing. Okay. You got a transcript, which is pretty good. Looks like you can download the resource as well, so we can watch it just as easily. Anyway, there's a good example there that you can download it. You've got a transcript here. So they're very well worked out resources. So that's the Scootle resource with lots of different options. Another one that is worthwhile exploring is one called e-learning resources. E-learning is a subscription concept, but it's actually reasonably cheap. It's only about $300 for a school for a year. And what do they actually have? Well, if we look into the e-learning home, and I've signed in here using the Elder School of Music sign-in, you've got a whole lot of organised categories. And there's a movie here that says Overview of the e-learning resources, and it looks like it's a YouTube channel. So if you type...
We know classroom music teachers are pressed.
If you type this in, you should be able to watch it. And it looks like it's fairly recent, so it's good to have it fresh. And this would explain pretty much what the resources are all about.
Beginner or advanced. This section promotes higher order thinking skills to support analysis and evaluation of music. Professional musicians demonstrate the construction of music.
Anyway, so there's a nice movie for you to watch, and you can find that on YouTube. If you do know the Elder School of Music login, fantastic, and you can have a look through those resources there. Its organisation, clearly you're clicking on a lot of web pages to drill into where things are. So, video transposing from written to concert pitch. Let's have a look what that one's about. Oh, I've clicked a bit soon by the looks of that. Let's have... Okay. Related pages. Rightio. So lots of information there. The beauty of this resource is that for $300, the students have access to it, and they can have their individual login or a particular code, much the same as here. So it's a very good value resource for any school to purchase. You've got quizzes and oral skill exercises here. So let's have a look. 30 start exercises, rhythm dictation. Let's see what they have. Science. Okay. Now imagine you write that down on a piece of paper. Oh, look, we've got a little hint. Oh, that's how you can get things started. Jolly good. And there's our answer. So, whole series of structured exercises and e-quizzes. This is something that you can explore. You'll know whether it's going to be useful to you. And you've got your teaching practice, your second lot of teaching practice, and maybe this is a resource that you'd like to utilise. You'll soon know when you get to your school and the type of classes that you have. So there's a couple of resources. Of course, the other one that we want you to explore is the Music First resources. So let's have a bit of a look where we're at with those. Now I want to refer back to one of the resources we gave out in our first week of lectures this semester, a practical guide to teaching music in the secondary school. I mentioned that it was a UK book, and so hence it was focused towards the UK curriculum. You might remember the opening chapters. We're looking at personalisation of teaching and learning, and also the democratisation of student voice and doing things that they wanted to learn. And they had this lovely little interactive, sorry, not interactive, but integrated learning representation, which has deep learning as the intersection of experience, leadership and support. When we look at the second chapter here, which is the one I'd like to look at for today, Keith Evans here gives a really good insight into the notions of the importance of developing integrated learning examples within our classrooms. And here it says the importance of developing knowledge, skills and understanding through practical music making and integration of performing, composing and listening are key concepts in the national curriculum. Well, our national curriculum, or Australian curriculum for the arts, includes the terminology of making and responding, but making and responding really do encompass performing, composing and listening, and the emphasis upon the musical elements. So when we go through to a few of their examples here, and this is one I'd like to look at today, which is on page number 18 of the actual book, or equivalent of 29 of the PDF. We're looking at a resource for students who are in Key Stage 4 in the UK, which is equivalent of our year 9 and 10. The whole class performance concept of beginning with an experience and then taking it into the learning activity is a key part of this concept. So I'm going to use these musical examples that are provided here and just give you a little bit of a talk through. Now it says use whole class performance to explore style and structure as a starting point for composing. And the example given is I've Got Rhythm by George Gershwin, and then the pupils gain knowledge of the 32-bar song form. And then they contrast it by performing Terry Riley's In C as a model for techniques of minimalism. Both of these are carried out prior to students working creatively in either style. So they're framed around real music experience and real music making. So what does that listen and sound like? Well, let's go across here. I've prepared a bit of a YouTube thing. So you could use something like this in a classroom setting. So if I look at the George Gershwin, we would definitely want to have a listen to the piece before we do anything much with it. So this is from the musical. So this is the A form, now the B form. Back to the A. Okay, so you can hear from that you've got the 32-bar form with the two lots of A's, then a B, then an A. Those things you could reveal to the student straight away, or start counting bars, have some sheets of music or chord structures for them to follow because you're wanting them to play the song, to experience it in a practical way, and then the repetition of the verses and possibly solos. As a point of interest, you may like to show them George Gershwin playing it. So he did a pretty good piano arrangement of it, and here's a nice little clip. Now you've got to remember, watching movie clips isn't practical music making. It sets the experience. And there's a nice little bit here explaining that it's a live movie performance. Anyway, we get the general idea. So then you'd be taking that into the classroom setting of trying to play the structure. Maybe all they'd be doing is playing the bass notes. You could have the more advanced people playing the melody. Depends on just how much time and the sort of learning you want to get out of it. But definitely it's going to chew up probably 2 lessons. So you've got to be careful of your time management. Be very clear about what you're expecting from this learning experience and then target it towards the outcome that you're looking for, which could be them composing using form and structure. Now, comparing I Got Rhythm with Terry Riley's In C is a really interesting one. So let's go and have a bit of a listen to that one. So if I come back here and we find In C. And here's the 1964 recording. So, as you can hear, it has all the hallmarks of minimalist music, and in the Wikipedia page here there's a whole lot of background that can provide further information for discussion. Comparing the two styles of with the Gershwin is clearly they're worlds apart in their intention, but they have a form, and the form and structure's different. It's going to have a different outcome. They're producing a sense of chance within the composition by Terry Riley. Each piece is going to sound, each performance is going to have a unique aspect to the Riley and C piece here. And here's an example of the score itself. You can see the different little sections that are compiled and played rather freely. The other thing that's mentioned here is a second piece, listening to performing and composing. For example, explore paired works with a common musical process, the slow-moving bass ostinato of Pachelbel's Canon in D, with Samosketchy from an Icelandic group, Sigur Rós, recorded in 2007. And then it suggests these things of developing the pupils' oral skills by asking them to join in with the repeating bass line. So it means you either have written up on the board or you have a sheet of music that has the bass line written out for them, exploring how the music unfolds in both pieces. They could then continue by orally copying other parts and or improvising and developing original melodic material over the established basses. So looking at and listening to ground bass music and then improvising above it and then turning that improvisation into a composition makes a really practical way of understanding authentic works of art and then extending that work and personalising it, which is the flavour from the first chapter, trying to find a connection. Now, if it's going to be a rock contemporary focus, well, yeah, you're going to have to choose a rock piece that has a ground bass. So let's just look at this example that's provided. Again, I've prepared a couple of YouTube links that have got straight to these pieces of music. So the first one is Canon. So let's find the Canon. And here's a very conventional version. Oh, great. Okay, let's skip that ad. Okay, there's the setting of the ground bass. I think we get the general idea with that one. So the other piece that's suggested here was the Samosketchy. So let's have a listen to that. So we're listening for a ground bass, a repeated chord pattern. Okay, you will hear a pattern that's a repeated figure. There's our one chord, I think it's E flat, G minor, 4 beats, C minor, and then an A flat for another 4 beats, and B flat. Now we've got more of a steady count. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that music there gives us a very good introduction to the notion of a ground bass with a different sort of structure. That one there's going to have a 5-bar pattern, and whereas Pucklebell Cannon's going to work quite nicely within a 4-bar sort of structure. So we come back to the final section of this little box here of integrated skills. Use improvisation to develop confidence in performing and to explore creative processes. For example, on one occasion this might be building up ideas over a short chord sequence, or another on the improvisation might be based around a series of riffs. Now, there are suggestions then of going on through the rondo form, and there's a whole lot of really good ideas through here, which we can come back to on another one of these show and tell sessions. So during our first week of this semester, we also looked at the Music First resources. And as I indicated, Music First is a really powerful learning management system with a whole lot of fantastic software. And we set you a task, which was to go through the tutorial movies, creating and managing a class, etc., down to here. For this week, I'd like you to look at these movies, and it's not just about looking at the movies now. We actually want you to create and manage a class and go through the steps. So once you've watched the movie, repeat the step, and you should end up with a bit of a class lesson structure. So log in. So we'll go through what I've prepared. I've worked through week 1's assignment. So I'd copy that and bring up a browser. And if I just type demo, I imagine I'll come up with the right thing. Okay, so this is my home page for Music First. It looks like it changes every now and then. And I've created some classes here, Year 8 class. I think the top one's a bit of a dud one, so I'll be going with this one here. I went through the tutorials the same as you guys were expected to do. And the first thing that I was meant to do was create and manage a class. So I went through, watched the movie, and I did create a class. So if I come back to this here, I've got my classes, Year 8 Music. I'll click on it. And I used the various sections here of adding a student, task type, shared content to create this little lesson structures. So this is my class. I've then I've experimented a little bit with tables. It's not very well laid out. I've embedded in a Adelaide Synth movie, just with their embed code. I have a lesson, create a lesson plan. Where did they go? Anyway, class overview, I think that's where I'm currently at. Oh, here we go. I've created a lesson and structure, class conga playing, embedded a nice little movie here, experimented with creating a lesson. I created some students and also imported a few. Now, this is nothing tricky. I could show you step by step, but all I have done is just go through each of these in order, and I've created this content. I have a mark book up here with these students' names and how I added students. So in the student management, I was able to search through and discover a whole lot of other pre-existing students in my class. Add existing students, I should say, here. And there's lots of other people who must have logged in at professional development sessions or something along those lines. So I've also created a student, and I've used that as the login for their passwords. So if I come out here and just log out, I can see what a student, and they've got the same password. Oh, a student. Okay, we'll log in. I won't bother saving it. And that's what the student gets to see in my class. There they've got the range of software that they can use, and apparently 2 tasks that are pretty identical. Anyway, so this week's task is to watch these movies and create a lesson plan, add a task to a lesson plan, rubrics, what you see is what you get, and inside music and note flight. Now, note flight is really cool. It's notation based, so if we click on it here, that redirects you to the actual software. So when we get to this landing pad for note flight, we have the home page here, so we get back to always this one. If you want to go through how to use this piece of software, there's a user guide just here, and you've got the ability to jump straight across to any of those. Hyperlinked tools, and of course there are some pre-existing scores that you can go through. So if we go to maybe Sunshine of Your Love, and if we want to play it, well, it's loading a whole lot of WAV files, I guess. It's taking a little while, isn't it? I apologise for that. And I imagine if we just click on that one there, we're only going to hear that part. And by the looks of that, there's a tempo adjustment here. Yeah, it's a little bit like Guitar Pro. Okay, so there's something for you to explore. You've got these other how-to tutorials, but then inside Music and Note Flight is a really interesting movie to watch because it shows how you can embed lesson plans straight to the software. So I'd love you to get through all of these and have a lesson organized. So for myself next week, I'll have gone through this and gone through the process of linking straight to one of these tutorial pages. It'd be really good if you could show us a couple of things next week in our week 4. Which will be our last one before you go back out onto teaching practice. So music first, very powerful stuff, and I'd like to see what you guys come up with. So I've got my classes organized here, my Year 8 class, and so you need to have a bit of a landing page and a few skills with this, because this becomes our major focus in the second half of this semester following your teaching prac. Well, that's all for today's lecture. Thanks very much for watching. I will look forward to seeing you next week on the Tuesday the 16th of August. A reminder that you need to have your analysis unit ready to be submitted and preferably uploaded via My Uni. But I will take paper copies if that's the only way that it can be done, but I'd much prefer it to be done electronically so that we've got a record of it all. I look forward to seeing your Music First progress. And also a reminder to complete the placement survey so that we've got a record of the way you've been thinking about your teaching, and that gives me a bit more feedback on the things that you'd like to learn. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for watching.